Hey there guys, welcome back to my movie review series. So, if you guys have been following my video game channel, you might have seen that I recently reviewed the King Kong 2005 movie license video game that was actually based on this movie. And that kind of inspired me to rewatch the movie and give it a review, because it had been a movie that it had been some time since I last seen. It was a movie that I saw in the theatre on its release day back when it came out when I was a kid, and it was a movie that I really enjoyed back then. And like I said, it had been quite some time since I'd seen the movie, and I wanted to sort of give the movie a retrospective review and kind of see if it holds up today. And rather than watch the theatrical release of the movie, which of course was the one I'd seen back as a kid, I decided to watch the extended version of the movie. And the reason why is because there were a lot of large action set pieces in this movie, and some really cool special effects that were actually removed from the theatrical cut. And a lot of that content was alluded to in the video game, and some of the movie's trailers too. And it was a shame that some of that got cut from the theatrical release. And I thought that the theatrical release of the movie, in retrospect, wasn't very well edited, if you know what I mean. There was just too much cut out from it and too much left in, which in my opinion could have been cut out. And that's one of the things I want to talk about. So, this movie, released in 2005, directed by Peter Jackson. This, of course, came a couple of years after Peter Jackson directed the legendary and very successful Lord of the Rings trilogy. The Lord of the Rings trilogy and the financial success of that trilogy is kind of what kick-started this, because Universal gave a massive budget for this movie. I believe this movie cost over $200 million, so this is a massive budget movie. And Peter Jackson, of course, was entrusted to make a movie with that budget due to his success and track record with the Lord of the Rings movies and whatnot, but I digress. So this movie, it stars Adrien, Brody, Jack Black, and several others. It's a movie, of course, a remake of the 1933 original, where a group of people venture out on a voyage to find Skull Island, and end up finding the giant ape King Kong. He kidnaps the woman and Daryl, played by Naomi, and the rest of the crew have to save her and whatnot. That's essentially the plot of the movie without getting into it too much. I'm sure you guys are all probably familiar with the general story of King Kong. But this movie's really interesting to me, and I gotta say, I'm so conflicted with this movie, because on the one hand, this is a fantastically made movie. It's beautiful, the cinematography, the shots in this movie, the CGI that's involved, the practical set pieces, just the overall authenticity of this movie, because it's set in the 1930s and it genuinely does look like the 1930s. Like, there's a huge sequence in the beginning and end of the movie where there's sort of a recreation of 1930s New York, and it looks so realistic and so fantastic. And of course, the special effects involving some of the monsters, like the CGI battle between King Kong and the T-Rex. There are some really breathtaking moments and some really breathtaking shots, and you can seriously tell that this had a massive budget behind it. The massive budget behind this movie was, I mean, they spared no expense. This movie looks fantastic. It looks so realistic, and it's very rare of me to say that about a movie that uses more CGI than practical effects. But like I said, the CGI in this movie holds up because it was top quality, state-of-the-art CGI, and there are also some practical set pieces. Where this movie falls apart for me, and why the theatrical version in particular is one I have a problem with, I mentioned how there were some big set pieces that were removed from the theatrical version. Well, the theatrical version, with it being of course a lot shorter than the extended version, you would expect it to flow a lot quicker. Pacing is very important in a movie, but unfortunately the pacing of this movie, particularly for the first hour, the pacing is so slow. I mean, it takes, this is a movie called King Kong, right? But it takes about an hour before King Kong actually makes an appearance in the movie. The scene where they're in New York at the beginning planning to go off on their voyage, and the scene during the voyage when they're on the boat and there's a lot of character building and character development and stuff like that, it goes on way too long. If you're a talented screenwriter and if you're a talented editor, you could have easily done all that in less than half an hour. But unfortunately, it just takes far too long to get to the island, and there's so much left in, like scenes with characters dancing or scenes with characters standing around, some pointless dialogue, some pointless back and forth between some of the characters, and there wasn't even a huge amount of character development. I mean, for example, there's a love story in the movie between Adrien Brody's character and Anne, who's played by Naomi Watts, but the love story goes nowhere. I mean, it really doesn't materialise at all during the movie, so I felt that whole subplot with them being in love could have easily been cut out. You know, there's a couple of subplots, like with Jamie Bell's character has sort of a father-son relationship with the co-captain, and again, it doesn't go anywhere. It just gets forgotten about midway through the movie in amongst all the action set pieces. So there's so much pointless character development. There's so much stuff in that first hour that felt so boring and so poorly paced to me and could have easily been cut out. Likewise, there are scenes that were cut out, like the fantastic set piece with the raft. You guys might recall, if you've played the video game, there was a huge level involving the raft where you basically are going down the rapids and stuff, and that was taken from the extended cut of the movie where the characters are on rafts and they get attacked by this water creature and have to fight it off and have to avoid it. And that was a massive, really cool scene in the movie, a cool action scene, but unfortunately it's not in the theatrical version, it's only in the extended version. And I'm thinking, why didn't they cut out some of the scenes on the boat near the beginning and keep this scene in? It doesn't make sense to me. There's also another big action scene with a Triceratops that was quite cool and realistic, and they cut that out too, and that didn't make any sense to me. So if I was reviewing the theatrical version of this movie, it would lose points due to its poor pacing and poor editing decisions, in my opinion. However, when they get to the island, and when all that boring stuff in the beginning is out the way, this movie becomes fantastic. It becomes extremely well paced from that point on. And there are some fantastic action scenes. You know, the action scene where they've fallen into this big ditch and they've got to defend themselves against these creatures, you know, these creepy giant insects. And again, in the video game, you fight a lot of these insects, and there was one scene in the movie where they fight them, and that was quite a creepy scene and quite disturbing too. You know, the scenes where Anne is running away from the T-Rex, and then just at the last moment King Kong arrives and they have a massive battle between the T-Rex. Again, this was recreated so well in the video game, and in the movie it looks breathtaking. Those fight scenes between King Kong and the T-Rex were fantastic, awesome fight scenes. Just some of the shots in this movie, you know, the scene where King Kong's sitting on his little lair at the top of the mountain, and he's just looking down at the scenery and the view, and just the scenery and the cinematography with how that shot was set up. It's just a breathtaking shot. The special effects, the CGI, everything looks fantastic. You know, the scene where King Kong is chasing Anne because Adrien Brody's character rescues her and King Kong's chasing them, that's a very tense scene and a very fast-paced scene. The scene where they're trying to capture him and they're trying to sedate him, and you know, he's just going absolutely berserk. There's so many massive, impressive action set pieces in this movie which look so amazing. And yeah, I think this movie was really entertaining. I really do. Some of the acting performances I like, and it's weird because there are actors in this movie like Jack Black, for example, who is sort of a comic relief, but he also plays a predominant role. He's an actor who I've never been a big fan of. I don't really like Jack Black, but he's actually really good in this movie. I think he probably gives a career best performance here. You know, you got other characters like Chandler, who again is more comic relief. Adrien Brody actually does a really good job. His character turns out to be a badass. He's sort of the main action hero of the movie. You got, I mentioned Naomi Watts, so she just runs around screaming most of the movie, so she could have really been played by anybody. But I thought that the main cast, including guys like Adrien Brody and Jack Black and Jamie Bell too, who's in the movie, they all do a pretty good job acting-wise, okay, and the dialogue is okay. Although, I actually did prefer some of the dialogue that was in the video game, because you might recall, in this movie, there are a lot of crazy things going on, like a lot of big, real alien type environments, things that people haven't seen before and didn't know existed. And the characters don't seem to act appropriately. They seem to be a little bit robotic in the way that they discuss things. There didn't seem to be any like funny banter between the characters or anything, but in the video game they actually had a lot of funny discussions, like when dinosaurs start attacking and and Jack Black is like, I thought these were extinct. and Adrien Brody's just like, well, they are now, and things like that, and just a scene in the game where they have a look up at the mountain and Jack Black's just like, there, that's his lair, talking about King Kong, and they're like, how could you possibly know that? And he's like, that's where I'd live if I was king of this island. And there's funny stuff like that in the game that they didn't have in the movie, unfortunately. So yeah, this movie's okay. Some of the dialogue wasn't very good though, and I guess the ending of the movie was, I don't know, it just, in a way, it felt a little bit pretentious to me, like it was drawn out. Like the scene with the planes at the end went on way too long, in my opinion. It was drawn out too long. There's also a cringe-inducing scene with King Kong and Andaro go ice skating, and that made no sense. It was weird. But for the most part, I enjoy this movie. It's definitely a fantasy epic that looks fantastic. It's got great cinematography, great action sequences. Just on a technical level, from a technical point of view, this is definitely one of the best movies in you know, the early 2000s. This was definitely a great looking movie. But I think pacing issues, poor editing choices, a few dialogue things that could have been changed, and just some scenes that were cringe-inducing held it back from being a perfect movie. So I give this movie a 7 out of 10. I think this movie is really good. If you guys want to check out my review for the video game, I think the video game's better. I actually prefer that to the movie. I'll leave a link in the description section to this video if you guys want to check out my review for the video game. But man, this movie was very, very impressive for the most part, but it was just held back by a few editing choices. But for the most part, it's a very entertaining movie, so I give this a 7 out of 10. Let me know what you guys think. Stay tuned for more movie reviews. Check out my review for the game. Thanks for watching, and God bless.